I never thought my life would feel so flat. Not that I was expecting a daily display of fireworks, a constant, thundering applause for the simple act of existing. But when, exactly, did I become a supporting actor in the story of my own existence? My name is Matthew Collins, and I am 48 years old. On the surface, I am doing everything I am supposed to do. I am a success story, a photograph of the American dream printed on glossy, high-quality paper. I have a stable, lucrative career as a senior software engineer, a suburban home with a literal white picket fence, and 2 teenagers, Ethan and Grace, who are, by all societal metrics, on the right track. If someone were to look at my life from the outside, through the clean, smudge-free windows of our colonial-style house, they would probably think I was living the dream. But that's the thing about dreams. They have a way of turning into routines when you're not looking. And routines, if you let them, can slowly, silently, choke the life out of you. My days begin with a cold, monotonous, and unforgiving rhythm. The alarm clock, a digital tyrant, blares at precisely 6:15 a.m. I've stopped questioning why I still set it so early. It's not like there's a reason to rush anymore. My job, a field that once ignited something akin to ambition, to passion, in me, has become a hamster wheel of deadlines, meetings, and an endless, repeating cycle of glitches and bugs. I fix problems I stopped caring about years ago, all while pretending to find a deep and abiding meaning in the grind. Then there's Sarah, my wife. Our marriage wasn't always like this. There was a time, a distant, almost mythical past, when laughter filled the corners of our home, when we shared inside jokes that were a language of their own. We used to stay up late, fueled by cheap wine and a shared, foolish optimism, planning for our future. We used to lean on each other when the world felt heavy. But now we just coexist. We move through our home in a fog of polite indifference, 2 ghosts careful not to disrupt the fragile, brittle peace we've created. Even when we are in the same room, there is an unbridgeable, Grand Canyon-sized distance between us. Sarah often retreats to our bedroom early, citing exhaustion or a headache. I let her go. I don't even try to bridge the gap anymore. Dinner conversations with the kids are equally strained, a performance of domestic normalcy that fools no one. Ethan, at 17, has become a stranger to me, a sullen, angry creature who communicates in a series of grunts and monosyllables. He is always on his phone, or storming out to meet a group of friends I don't know and certainly don't approve of. Grace, at 14, is quieter, but her silence is just as troubling. She is either holed up in her room, a fortress of teenage angst, or glued to her own group chats. Her responses to my questions clipped and distant. It wasn't supposed to be this way. I thought I was building something solid, something durable, a family, a future, a life worth remembering. But somewhere along the line, I lost control of the narrative. I don't even know when it started to unravel. Maybe it was when the kids hit their teen years. Maybe it was when Sarah and I stopped making time for each other. Or maybe, if I'm being truly, brutally honest with myself, it was when I buried my own dreams in the name of a stability that has now become a prison. Ah, my dreams. They still linger in the background, whispering at the edges of my mind. I wanted to be a writer, once. There's even a folder on my laptop, a digital graveyard, called Untold Stories. It's filled with the skeletons of novels I never had the courage, or the time, to finish. I tell myself I'll get back to them someday. But that day never comes. The cracks in my life aren't just in my marriage, or with my kids. They're in me. I've become someone I barely recognize. A man who settles for comfort over passion, who avoids confrontation at all costs, who drifts through each day hoping that tomorrow, somehow, will be different. But nothing changes if you don't change it. And deep down, I know that. Something has to give. I can't keep going like this, suffocating under the weight of a life that feels more like an obligation than a choice. But where do you even start, when everything feels like it's already crumbling? You don't. You wait. You endure. At least, that's what I tell myself. Until the day you can't anymore. This is the story of how my life fell apart. And strangely, how that falling apart became the best thing that ever happened to me. But we'll get to that. For now, let's just say that when I woke up this morning, I had no idea that the hairline fractures I'd been so carefully, so willfully, ignoring, were about to split wide open. It started out like any other Tuesday. Mundane, gray, and utterly forgettable. The kind of day that blends into all the others, until you can't tell where one ends and the next begins. My alarm went off at 6:15 a.m. The coffee was too bitter. The commute felt like an endless, soul-crushing crawl through a river of molasses. By the time I got to the office, a dull, persistent ache had settled behind my eyes, a nagging, rhythmic throb that I dismissed as just another symptom of the low-grade, chronic stress I had long since stopped acknowledging. I didn't expect to be sent home. My boss, a man whose patience for sick days was about as generous as his sense of humor, took one look at my pale, sweaty face and said, "You look terrible, Collins. Go home, before you infect the rest of us." I didn't argue. The ache behind my eyes had turned into a pounding, nauseating headache, and all I wanted was to crawl into bed and sleep off whatever was ailing me. When I pulled into our driveway, I noticed it immediately. The green pickup truck. It wasn't familiar, but I told myself it might belong to a delivery person or a contractor. Still, a cold, sharp unease coiled in my stomach. Something felt off. Maybe it was the way the truck was so boldly, so unapologetically, parked, as if daring me to ask why it was there. The house was too quiet when I stepped inside. You get used to the rhythms of a home, the small, ambient sounds that make it feel alive, the low hum of the television, the clink of dishes in the sink, the distant, muffled murmur of voices. But today, the silence was oppressive. It hung in the air like a warning. I kicked off my shoes and made my way toward the stairs, trying to shake the uneasy, gnawing feeling that was tightening its grip on me. And that's when I heard it. Laughter. Her laughter. It was light, melodic, and painfully, achingly familiar. It was the kind of genuine, uninhibited laugh that used to belong only to me. I froze, my hand on the banister, my heart hammering in my chest. My mind raced through the possibilities. Maybe she was on the phone. Maybe she had invited a friend over. But deep down, in a place of cold, hard, undeniable certainty, I already knew the truth. My feet moved before my brain could catch up, carrying me up the stairs, one slow, hesitant, silent step at a time. The bedroom door was ajar, just enough for me to see a sliver of the room, a sliver of the bed. And then, I saw them. Sarah, my wife of 20 years, and a man I didn't recognize. Entwined. Laughing. Whispering. Time stopped. My chest felt like it was being crushed under the weight of an invisible, suffocating force. I wanted to burst into the room, to yell, to scream, to demand answers. But I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. All I could do was stand there, frozen in the doorway of a life I no longer recognized. I reached for my phone, my hands trembling so badly I nearly dropped it. My breath was shallow, my head spinning. But some strange, detached, clinical part of my brain insisted that I needed proof. Proof that this wasn't some fever dream, some hallucination brought on by exhaustion and a bad night's sleep. I took a photo, and then another. Each soft, almost silent click of the shutter felt like a dagger to my chest. Her laughter, her beautiful, melodic laughter, floated through the air, mocking me, cutting deeper than I ever thought possible. When I had enough, I backed away, careful not to let the old, creaky floorboards betray my presence. I didn't want her to know I had been there. Not yet. I don't remember walking down the stairs or stepping back outside into the cold, indifferent air. It hit me like a slap, but even that didn't feel real. My car was waiting, a silent, metallic refuge I didn't deserve. I slid into the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel as though it could anchor me to something solid, something real. The green pickup truck was still there, bold, unbothered. I stared at it, my breath fogging up the windshield. And for a long, silent moment, all I could think about was how everything I thought I knew, everything I had built, had been upended, had been annihilated in an instant. My marriage, my home, my life. I had always imagined that if something like this ultimate, catastrophic system failure, ever happened, I would scream. I would throw things. I would demand answers. But there was no screaming. There was no breaking of dishes. There was just a profound, deafening, suffocating silence. And somewhere, in the back of my mind, a single, cold, clear thought took root. Asterisk, this is the moment. This is the moment everything changes. Asterisk. I don't remember how long I sat in the car, staring at that green pickup truck. 5 minutes? An hour? Time had lost all meaning. My hands were trembling. My jaw clenched so tightly it ached. But my mind was unnervingly, terrifyingly calm. It was the kind of calm that follows the initial, blinding flash of an explosion, the eye of the hurricane before the real destruction begins. There it was, bold as brass, sitting in my driveway like it belonged there. That damn truck. A blatant, unapologetic symbol of everything I had just seen. My stomach churned, a hot, acidic bile rising in my throat as I imagined the smug, faceless bastard who drove it. He was still inside my house, still laughing with my wife, still lying on the bed where I had slept for 20 years. My bed. Our bed. The air in the car felt stifling, like it was pressing in on me from all sides. I couldn't just sit there. I needed to move, to do something, anything, to reclaim even a sliver of control in a moment where I felt completely, utterly powerless. I stepped out into the cold, the winter air a sharp, biting slap against my flushed skin. My boots crunched against the gravel as I walked to the back of my car and opened the trunk. The toolkit was right where it always was, tucked neatly in the corner, waiting for emergencies. Well, this felt like an emergency. Not in the traditional sense, but it would do. I crouched down by the front right tire of the pickup, my movements methodical, precise. I unscrewed the valve cap with a steady hand. The hiss of escaping air was almost therapeutic, a long, slow exhalation of pressure. It was like the truck itself was deflating under the weight of my silent, seething anger. One tire wasn't enough. I moved to the next, then the next, and finally, the fourth. Each tire sank lower, the truck settling onto its rims, helpless and grounded. It wasn't justice, not by a long shot, but it was something. A small, petty, but deeply satisfying act of defiance in a situation where I felt completely, utterly powerless. When I straightened up, wiping my hands on my jeans, I allowed myself a small, grim smile. Let him figure out how to explain this later. Let him call a tow truck in the freezing cold. Let him feel even a fraction of the inconvenience, of the disruption he had so casually, so callously brought into my life. I got back into my car, the tension in my chest easing slightly. It wasn't enough, of course. A few deflated tires weren't going to fix what I had seen or erase the images that were now seared into my memory. But it was a start. It was a way to remind myself that I wasn't entirely powerless. Driving away from the house, I didn't look back. I couldn't. The thought of seeing it, the home I had worked so hard to build, the place where I had raised my children, made my stomach turn. That house wasn't mine anymore. It belonged to someone else now, someone who thought they could laugh in the face of everything I had built and walk away unscathed. I pulled into the parking lot of a small, nondescript motel on the edge of town. The neon sign flickered faintly, casting a harsh, unforgiving glow against the dark, winter sky. It wasn't much, but it would do. I needed space. Space to think. Space to plan. Space to figure out what the hell came next. The room was as bleak, as sterile, as I felt. White walls, a single lamp that flickered when I turned it on, and a bed that looked like it hadn't been comfortable in decades. I tossed my duffel bag onto the bed and sank heavily into the chair by the desk. My phone buzzed, breaking the silence. Sarah's name lit up the screen, her calls coming in one after the other. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Not yet. Instead, I opened the photo gallery on my phone and stared at the images I had taken. Proof. Cold, hard, undeniable proof of what I had seen. My stomach churned, but I forced myself to keep looking. Each photo was a reminder of the betrayal, of the lies, of the mockery of everything I thought we had. Then, an idea struck me. Not out of anger, but out of a sheer, cold necessity. I wasn't going to yell, or scream, or make a scene. That would be too easy, too predictable. No. I was going to be smart about this. I was going to be calculated. I had caught a glimpse of the truck's insurance card through the windshield before I had left. One name stood out, Mark Davis. A quick online search pulled up a LinkedIn profile, and better yet, a Facebook account. His wife's name was easy to find, Jessica Davis. And within moments, I had her email address. The message I sent was short, anonymous, detached. I attached the clearest, most damning photos I had taken. And I wrote a single, simple sentence. Asterisk, you deserve to know the truth. Your husband was with my wife today. These photos speak for themselves. Asterisk. Before I could overthink it, Before my conscience could intervene, I hit send. The message disappeared into the void, and I leaned back in the chair, exhaling a long, slow breath. It wasn't a solution. It wasn't closure. But it was a start. If Mark Davis thought he could just waltz into my life and walk away unscathed, he was sorely, tragically, mistaken. I stared at the screen for a while, the silence in the room pressing in on me. My chest still ached, my head still spun. But for the first time since I had walked into that house, I felt the faintest, most fragile flicker of control. It wasn't much, but it was enough. For now. The next day, I returned to the house. I didn't rush. There was no point. I knew exactly what I was walking into, and the thought filled me with an equal, sickening measure of dread and a cold, hard determination. My goal was simple: pack my things, walk out the door, and leave the wreckage of my old life behind. As I parked my car in the driveway, the sight of the house hit me differently this time. It didn't feel like home anymore. The place where I had shared 2 decades of my life with Sarah, the place where I had raised Ethan and Grace, now felt foreign, alien. It felt like a stage where all the props had been rearranged, where a play I didn't recognize was being performed. I stepped inside, and the atmosphere was thick with a tense, cloying silence. I hadn't even made it past the entryway when I heard her voice. "Matthew," Sarah called from the living room. Her tone was quiet, hesitant. "We need to talk." I ignored her, not out of cruelty, but because I knew how these conversations went. The pleading, the excuses, the half-truths. It was a script I had no interest in following. Instead, I headed straight for the stairs, my footsteps heavy, deliberate, on the hardwood floor. "Matthew," she said again, louder this time. I could hear her scrambling to follow me, her desperation a palpable thing. "Please, just talk to me." By the time I reached our bedroom, she was standing in the doorway, her face pale, her eyes red and swollen. "What are you doing?" she demanded, her voice cracking as she saw me pulling a large, empty suitcase from the top of the closet and throwing it onto the bed. "What I should have done a long time ago," I replied, my own tone calm, but resolute. My hands moved methodically, pulling clothes from the drawers, packing only the essentials. I wasn't in the mood for sentimentality. She stepped closer, her voice rising with a frantic, rising panic. "You can't just leave like this. We can work through this, Matthew." It was a mistake. I cut her off, my anger, which had been a cold, simmering thing, finally bubbling to the surface. "A mistake," I said, turning to face her. "A mistake is forgetting an anniversary, Sarah. A mistake is leaving the stove on. 6 months of lies, of sneaking around. That's not a mistake. That's a choice." Her face crumpled at my words, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "I was lonely, Matthew," she said, her voice a trembling, broken whisper. "You were so distant. We stopped talking, we stopped connecting. I didn't know what to do. And your solution was to crawl into someone else's bed?" I shot back, my voice sharp, unrelenting. "Did you think that would fix us? Did you even, for a single, solitary second, think about what it would do to me? To the kids?" She flinched at that, her sobs growing louder. "I know I messed up, okay? But I love you, Matthew. I don't want to lose you. Please, let's just fix this. I'll do whatever it takes." I just shook my head, my jaw tightening as I forced myself to stay composed. "You don't destroy the people you love, Sarah. You don't humiliate them. You don't break their trust, and then you don't get to beg for forgiveness when you get caught." Her shoulders slumped, and she sank onto the bed, burying her face in her hands. "I was scared," she whispered between sobs. "Scared of losing you. Scared of waking up one day and realizing you didn't love me anymore." I felt a pang of something. Sympathy? Regret? I wasn't sure. But it didn't change anything. "You didn't lose me, Sarah," I said, my voice quiet, but firm. "You threw me away." The silence that followed was deafening. For a moment, I just stood there, watching the woman I had shared so much of my life with fall apart. And then, I turned back to my suitcase, zipping it shut with a finality that felt like the closing of a chapter. When I reached the bottom of the stairs, Sarah was there again, blocking the door. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Please, Matthew," she said, her hands trembling. "Don't do this." I met her gaze, my own expression cold, resolute. "You already did." And with that, I stepped past her, the sound of the front door closing behind me punctuating the finality of it all. As I walked to my car, I didn't look back. The house stood there, a silent, imposing monument to a life that no longer belonged to me. My suitcase felt heavy in my hand, but it was nothing compared to the weight I had been carrying in that house for far too long. The cold winter air stung my face as I slid into the driver's seat, but for the first time in months, I felt something close to relief. Not happiness, not yet, but relief. The kind that comes from knowing you've made the right choice, even when it's the hardest one. This wasn't the end, not really. It was just the beginning of something new. What that something was, I wasn't sure yet. But as I drove away from the house that had once been my home, I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't go back. Not ever. Leaving Sarah, leaving the house, that was one thing. Facing Ethan and Grace, that was another beast entirely. I had braced myself for their reactions, knowing full well that they would each have their own unique, and uniquely painful, way of processing this mess. What I hadn't anticipated was just how deeply their emotions would cut through the armor I had so carefully constructed around myself. Ethan stormed into my motel room 2 days after I had left. I hadn't told him where I was staying, but Sarah must have. I was sitting at the small, wobbly table, sorting through a pile of paperwork I had brought with me, when the door flung open, slamming against the wall with a force that rattled the cheap, framed mirror above the bed. "So that's it," Ethan said, his voice dripping with a contempt that was pure, uncut teenage rage. He stood there, his fists clenched, his face red with an anger he made no effort to conceal. "You're just walking out on us?" I set down my papers and turned to face him, doing my best to remain calm, to not rise to the bait. "I'm not walking out on you, Ethan," I said, my voice even. "I'm making a choice for myself." He laughed, a bitter, humorless sound, and began to pace back and forth in the small, cramped room like a caged animal. "A choice for yourself? That's rich, Dad. Real noble. Just leave Mom to pick up the pieces while you play the victim. Do you even care about what this is doing to us? To me? To Grace?" His words hit me like a punch to the gut, but I kept my tone steady. "This isn't about playing the victim, Ethan. It's about respecting myself enough to walk away from something that's broken." "Respecting yourself?" he shot back, his voice rising. "How about respecting us? You think this is hard for you? Try being the kid whose dad just bails because he can't handle it." I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to stay composed. "I didn't just bail, Ethan. And don't you dare try to put this all on me. I didn't create this situation. But I'm not going to stay and pretend that it's okay. That wouldn't help any of us." He just scoffed, shaking his head as he turned toward the door. "You're just running away. Typical." Before I could respond, he had slammed the door behind him, the sound reverberating through the tiny, sterile room. I sat there for a long, silent time, staring at the closed door, his words echoing in my mind. I had known he would be angry, but hearing the raw, undisguised disappointment in his voice, that was harder than I had expected. Later that evening, there was another knock at the door. Softer this time. I hesitated before opening it, unsure of who, or what, I would be facing next. When I opened the door, Grace stood there, her shoulders hunched, her eyes red and swollen from crying. "Can I come in?" she asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. I stepped aside, and she walked in, sitting on the edge of the bed and fidgeting with the hem of her sweatshirt. For a moment, she didn't say anything, and neither did I. The silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken emotions. "Dad," she began finally, her voice trembling. Please don't leave us." Her words shattered something inside me. I sat down beside her, careful to keep my voice gentle. "Grace, this isn't about leaving you or Ethan. I will always be your dad." She shook her head, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "But it feels like you're giving up on us. On me. I know things have been bad, but I don't want to lose you." I reached out, placing a hand on hers. "You're not losing me, Grace. This decision, it's not about you or your brother. It's about me and your mom. But no matter where I go, I am always going to be here for you. You will always be my daughter." She sniffled, wiping her face with the sleeve of her sweatshirt. "Promise. I promise," I said, my voice firm but kind. For the first time in days, I saw a glimmer of hope in her tearful eyes. It was fragile, but it was a start. The next morning, I faced both of them at the kitchen table in the house. Sarah stood in the doorway, watching me warily as I addressed our children. "This family isn't broken because I'm leaving," I said, my tone steady. "It was already breaking. and none of us wanted to admit it. Ethan just crossed his arms, his scowl deepening, but I pressed on. I wasn't always the husband or the father I should have been, but we are all responsible for how we move forward from here. I am still here for you, both of you, but I can't stay here and pretend that I'm okay when I'm not. Grace nodded hesitantly, her own expression softening. But Ethan stood abruptly, scraping his chair across the floor. "You're just making excuses," he muttered before leaving the room. It wasn't the resolution I had wanted, but it was the truth, and that was all I could give them. I had to believe that, someday, they would understand. For now, it was enough to have taken the first, painful, necessary step toward healing, even if it hurt like hell. In the days after leaving the house, I kept to myself, a self-imposed exile in a bleak, anonymous motel room. My routine was simple. Wake up, take a long, aimless walk, pick at whatever tasteless, pre-packaged breakfast I could stomach, and spend hours staring at the blinking cursor on my laptop screen, trying to decide what my next move should be. It was lonely, but it was safe. It was a space where I didn't have to answer questions or deal with the messy, painful wreckage of my life. And then, Clara came back into my world. Clara was an old colleague I hadn't seen in years. We had worked together on a major project back when I still cared about my job, back when I still had some semblance of ambition. I had always admired her sharp, incisive mind and her easy, infectious laugh. We had run into each other a few weeks ago at a downtown coffee shop, one of those quick, polite, almost meaningless exchanges where you promise to catch up soon, but never actually do. Except Clara had meant it. She found me again, this time in a small, greasy spoon diner I had discovered near the motel. I was nursing a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold, lost in my own thoughts, when her voice pulled me out of the fog. "Matthew Collins? Is that really you?" I looked up, startled, and there she was, her warm, familiar smile disarming me in an instant. Clara hadn't changed much. She still had the same vibrant, kinetic energy, the same preternatural knack for making you feel like you were the most interesting person in the room. "Clara," I said, managing a small, weak smile. "Long time no see." She slid into the seat across from me without waiting for an invitation, her eyes bright with a friendly, uncomplicated curiosity. "What's with the dark circles under your eyes?" she asked. "You look like you've been through a war." I laughed, a bitter, humorless sound that was harsh even to my own ears. "Something like that." She just tilted her head, studying me. "Well, lucky for you. I'm an excellent listener. What's going on?" At first, I hesitated. I wasn't exactly in the mood to spill my guts to someone I hadn't seen in years. But something about Clara's presence felt safe. Like she wasn't there to judge or to offer unsolicited advice. She was just there to be there. So I told her. Not everything, but enough. Enough for her to understand why I was sitting alone in a diner at 11 a.m. on a weekday, trying to figure out what the hell had happened to my life. When I finished, Clara leaned back in her seat, her expression thoughtful. "You know," she said, "you always used to talk about wanting to write. Did you ever actually do it?" I laughed again, that same harsh, unfamiliar sound. "Not really. A few false starts. Some half-finished ideas. Life got in the way." She just raised an eyebrow. "Life? Or excuses?" I opened my mouth to respond, but she held up a hand to stop me. "Look, I'm not here to lecture you, Matthew. But I remember how you used to light up when you talked about writing. You've got something to say. Maybe now's the time to say it." Her words stuck with me long after she had left. I couldn't remember the last time someone had encouraged me like that, had reminded me of the person I used to be, before I had buried him under layers of responsibility and compromise. That night, for the first time in years, I opened my laptop and stared at a blank document. The cursor blinked at me, a tiny, rhythmic, insistent heartbeat, daring me to start. I wrote a single sentence, then another, and before I knew it, the hours had slipped away, and I had the rough, clumsy, but undeniably real beginnings of a story. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. Clara and I started meeting regularly after that. Sometimes it was for coffee, other times a walk in the park. We didn't always talk about the messy, painful details of my life. Sometimes, we just reminisced about old times, or debated which diner in town had the best pie. But every time we met, I felt a little lighter, a little more like myself. One afternoon, as we sat on a park bench, Watching the leaves fall, Clara turned to me and said, "You know, you're stronger than you give yourself credit for." I just snorted. "Yeah, right. I'm serious," she said, her tone firm. "Most people would have crumbled under what you're going through. But you're still here. You're still standing. And you're still fighting for something better. That counts for a lot." Her words hit me harder than I had expected. I had spent so much time feeling like a failure, like I had let my marriage fall apart, let my kids down, let myself down. But Clara, in her simple, direct, and unwavering way, made me feel like maybe, just maybe, I wasn't as broken as I thought. The more time I spent with her, the more I realized how much I had been missing. Not just in my relationships, but in myself. Clara didn't fix me. She didn't even try to. She just gave me the space, the encouragement, to start fixing myself. And for the first time in a very long time, I started to believe that maybe I could. The road back to my kids wasn't smooth. If anything, it was like trying to scale a sheer, crumbling rock face, barefoot. Every step forward felt precarious, and one misstep, one wrong word, could send everything tumbling down again. Ethan and Grace were still adjusting to the new, fractured reality of our family. And while they didn't always say it outright, I could feel the weight of their anger, their confusion, their hurt, every time we talked. Ethan was the hardest to reach. After his initial, explosive outburst at the motel, he had retreated into a fortress of sullen, angry silence. He stopped answering my calls. It was Sarah who broke the news to me a week later. He had been caught with a small amount of weed at school, and the principal, following a zero-tolerance policy, had called the police. When I picked up the phone that night, I heard the words I never thought I'd hear. Asterisk, your son has been arrested. Asterisk. The drive to the police station was a blur of a hot, blinding anger and a cold, sickening disappointment. Not just in Ethan, but in myself. I kept asking the same, unanswerable questions over and over again. How did I let it get this bad? What could I have done differently? Ethan was sitting on a cold, metal bench in the holding area, his shoulders hunched, his expression a mixture of defiance and a deep, buried fear. When he saw me, he didn't say a word. He just stared at the floor, as if daring me to yell at him. "What the hell were you thinking?" I said, my voice low but sharp. He just shrugged. "It's not a big deal." "Not a big deal," I snapped, slamming my palm on the table between us. "You've just landed yourself in jail, Ethan. How is that not a big deal?" He finally looked up at me, his eyes blazing with a raw, accusatory anger. "You don't get it, Dad. You don't care about anything but yourself. You just walked out on us." His words hit me harder than I had expected, but I forced myself to stay calm. "I didn't walk out on you, Ethan. I walked out of a situation that wasn't healthy. There's a difference." He just scoffed, crossing his arms. "Whatever. You're just running away." I took a deep breath, forcing the anger down. "You're angry. I get it. But that doesn't give you a free pass to throw your life away. I'm going to help you, but you are going to face the consequences of this. I'm not going to let you keep making excuses." It was like a dam breaking. Over the next few weeks, as we navigated the juvenile justice system, Ethan and I started having real, painful, honest conversations. Conversations that often ended in tears or shouting. But they were conversations we should have had years ago. When he entered a court-mandated rehab program, I visited him every weekend. At first, he was distant, resentful. But slowly, he started to open up. One afternoon, during a family therapy session, he finally looked me in the eye and said, "I was angry at you, Dad. But I see now. I see now that you were just trying to help. I don't want to disappoint you anymore." I wanted to tell him that he had never disappointed me, but I knew he needed to say it, as much as I needed to hear it. "You're not a disappointment, Ethan," I said, my voice steady. "But you have to believe in yourself as much as I believe in you." Meanwhile, Grace was quietly, almost imperceptibly, transforming before my eyes. After our conversation in the motel, she started making small, deliberate changes. She started staying home to study, instead of going out with her friends. She started helping around the house. She even started asking me for advice on her school projects. She threw herself into her schoolwork, and her grades skyrocketed. One evening, she handed me a brochure for a summer leadership program. Do you think I can do this?" she asked, her voice tinged with a fragile, hopeful uncertainty. I looked her straight in the eye. "Grace, you can do anything. You've worked so hard for this. I am so proud of you." Her smile was hesitant, but genuine. And I knew, in that moment, how much it meant for her to hear those words from me. Watching her grow into this confident, capable young woman felt like a win, a small, precious victory, a reminder that no matter how much I had stumbled as a parent, I hadn't failed entirely. Even Sarah surprised me. She started taking accountability, in her own quiet, understated way. She repainted the house. She fixed the leaky faucets I had always meant to get to. She started volunteering at a local animal shelter. She didn't say it outright, but I could see that she was trying to rebuild her own life. Not just for herself, but for the kids. We were far from perfect. Family dinners were still awkward. Ethan and I still had our moments of tension. But there were glimpses of something better, a fragile, tentative hope that maybe, just maybe, we could figure out how to be a family again. One night, as I was leaving the house after dropping Grace off, I glanced back and saw Sarah standing in the doorway. She wasn't angry. She wasn't sad. She just looked tired. "Thanks for coming by," she said softly. "Always," I replied. And for the first time, I meant it. We weren't fixed, not by a long shot. But we were moving forward. And for now, that was enough. The mountain town I chose for my self-imposed exile wasn't glamorous, but that was the point. Durango, Colorado had a kind of quiet, rugged, unassuming charm that felt like exactly what I needed. It was small, but vibrant, a place where strangers waved at you on the street, and the pace of life slowed just enough to let you breathe. I arrived with nothing but a rented cabin, a couple of beat-up suitcases, and a laptop full of unfinished stories. It wasn't much, but it was mine. The first night in the cabin was surreal. The walls were bare, the furniture was sparse, and the silence was deafening. But it wasn't the kind of silence I had grown used to back in the house, the heavy, suffocating, tense kind. This was a quieter quiet, a peaceful quiet, one that didn't demand anything from me. I sat by the window, watching the snow begin to fall, a soft, white blanket covering the world outside, and for the first time in years, I felt unburdened. Not happy, not yet, but lighter, somehow. The next morning, I set up a small workspace by the window. A modest, second-hand desk, a lamp, and my laptop. That was all I needed. The view was breathtaking. Snow-dusted peaks stretching into the horizon, framed by towering, ancient pines. I sat down, opened a blank document, and just stared at the blinking cursor. At first, nothing came. My mind was still tangled in the messy, painful wreckage I had left behind, replaying old conversations, old arguments, old wounds. But then, I remembered Clara's words. Asterisk, "You've got something to say. Maybe now's the time to say it." Asterisk. So I started typing. It wasn't easy. The words came slowly at first, each sentence a battle. But the more I wrote, the more the knots in my chest, in my soul, began to loosen. I wasn't writing for anyone else. Not for an audience. Not for a publisher. Not for approval. I was writing for me. And for the first time in years, that was enough. Days turned into weeks, and the story began to take shape. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. A raw, honest reflection of everything I had been through. The pain, the healing, the loss, the hope. On a whim, I joined a local writers group. And to my surprise, it became one of the best decisions I had made in a long time. Every week, we would gather in a cozy, cluttered bookstore downtown, sharing our stories and offering feedback over cups of strong, black coffee and stale pastries. It was humbling and inspiring to be surrounded by people who understood the struggle and the joy of putting words on a page. The cabin started to feel like home. I hung up a few pictures of Ethan and Grace. I framed a couple of sketches I had found at a local art fair. I even adopted a scruffy, old dog from the local animal shelter, a gentle, sad-eyed creature named Max who had been there for far too long. He wasn't much of a guard dog, but he was good company, always wagging his tail and nudging me with his wet nose when I got too lost in my writing. The town itself welcomed me in its own small, quiet ways. The barista at the local coffee shop learned my name. The clerk at the hardware store started asking about my fixer-upper projects. I even struck up a friendship with my neighbor, a retired carpenter who offered to help me build a better bookshelf after seeing my own flimsy, pathetic attempt. For the first time in years, I felt like I was a part of something. Not just a town, but a life. Of course, the past didn't just disappear. There were nights when I would sit by the fire, staring into the flames, and think about Sarah, about the life we had built, and the brutal, inexplicable ways it had crumbled. I thought about Ethan and Grace, and wondered if they were okay, if they had forgiven me yet. The memories didn't hurt as much as they used to, but they still lingered, like ghosts on the edges of my new life. But then, there were the moments of clarity. The mornings when I would wake up to the sound of birds outside my window, and feel genuinely, profoundly grateful to be alive. The afternoons when I would lose myself in my writing, the words flowing like they hadn't in years. The evenings when I would sit on the porch with Max, watching the sun dip behind the mountains, and realize that I didn't feel broken anymore. This wasn't a fresh start. It was a continuation. A new chapter in a story that was still being written. The pain, the mistakes, the failures. They were all a part of it, woven into the fabric of who I was. But they didn't define me. Not anymore.